Maya Thompson could still remember the day she met David. It was a small detail, as clear and indelible in her memory as her own name. They had met at a medical conference, him, a highly respected hospital owner, and her, a woman driven to help others through her own practice. David was a quiet, focused man whose laughter seemed to burst out unexpectedly, startling both himself and those around him. That spark of warmth beneath his reserved exterior was what had caught Maya's attention, and soon, they were inseparable. They married in the springtime, the warmth of the season fitting the union that felt like the start of a journey toward everything good. It was only natural, she thought, that they would eventually want a child of their own to share in that love. When Maya found out she was pregnant, David's joy was boundless. He began making preparations almost immediately, setting up a nursery, filling their home with books, and even talking about the future dreams he had for their child. Now, as she sat in the clinic's waiting room, Maya could feel the pulse of anticipation in her chest. Her fingers drummed lightly on her knee, and she smiled as her gaze flitted over the rows of glossy magazine covers. Today was a big day. She was finally far enough along to have a comprehensive ultrasound, and both she and David were about to learn more about the baby growing inside her. "Mrs. Thompson." A voice jolted Maya out of her thoughts. She looked up to see Nurse Ellie Grant, a petite woman with a warm expression, standing at the door. Ellie's friendly demeanor instantly put Maya at ease. She had come highly recommended and had been attentive and kind at every visit, making Maya feel like more than just another patient. Maya stood, smoothing her blouse and clutching her purse. Her thoughts raced as she followed Nurse Ellie into the examination room, her heart swelling with joy. She couldn't wait to see David's face when he heard the baby's heartbeat. Dr. Warren Phillips entered shortly after, his usual composed, slightly distant smile in place. He was one of the top gynecologists in the city, a fact David had not let her forget when they chose him for her prenatal care. With his broad shoulders, silver hair, and calm eyes, Dr. Phillips seemed like the very embodiment of reassurance and professionalism. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Thompson," he greeted her, his voice even and practiced. "How are we feeling today?" Maya smiled and let out a small laugh. "Excited. Nervous. You know, all of the usual feelings, I guess." "Perfectly natural," he replied. "Everything's looking normal, but today we'll have a better look." The moment of truth was near. As Maya reclined on the exam table, she held David's hand tightly, her eyes fixed on the monitor. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, thrumming in time with her excitement. Dr. Phillips performed the ultrasound, explaining the various parts of the baby's body as they came into view on the screen. Maya's smile widened as she watched the small form on the monitor. It was surreal to think that she was watching the first glimpses of their child, a being who had already become the center of their world. After a moment, Dr. Phillips paused. His gaze lingered on the screen, and the easy smile faded from his face. Maya noticed the shift immediately, the way his hand hesitated as he adjusted the settings on the machine. Her heart skipped a beat, and she felt David's hand tighten around hers. "What is it, Dr. Phillips?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Phillips seemed to struggle for a moment, glancing between the screen and her with a faint crease in his brow. He opened his mouth to respond, but then, as if caught by an invisible force, he hesitated. I think there's something I need to discuss with you privately," he finally said, his voice carefully controlled. Maya's heart hammered in her chest as dread started to creep in. She glanced at David, who gave her a reassuring smile, but she could tell he was just as unsettled. The excitement that had filled the room only moments ago was replaced with a thick, uncomfortable silence. "Is everything okay with the baby?" she asked, unable to keep the tremor out of her voice. Dr. Phillips hesitated again, then cleared his throat. "The baby appears healthy, yes, but I think there's something we should talk about in my office." Nurse Ellie offered Maya a gentle hand to help her sit up, her expression a mixture of concern and professionalism. She walked them both to Dr. Phillips's office, where the tension grew with each step. Maya could barely look at David, terrified that her worst fears were about to come true. Once inside the office, Dr. Phillips took a deep breath and closed the door behind them. He sat down across from them, folding his hands and looking at both Maya and David with a strange, unreadable expression. "Mrs. Thompson," he began slowly, "I want to assure you that your baby is healthy and developing normally. But there's something unusual, something that I feel I need to address with you, both medically and ethically." Maya exchanged a quick glance with David, who looked equally puzzled. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Dr. Phillips leaned forward, his gaze fixed intently on her. "The results from your previous genetic tests, combined with today's scan, show certain characteristics that are inconsistent with what we would typically expect, given your and Mr. Thompson's backgrounds." The words hung heavy in the air, a veil of tension settling over them. Maya's mind raced, trying to decipher what he was saying, but the implications eluded her. David's brow furrowed, his face darkening as he absorbed the doctor's words. "What are you suggesting, Dr. Phillips?" David asked, his voice edged with defensiveness. "Is there something you're not telling us about the baby's health?" Dr. Phillips took a long breath before responding. "No, it's not the health, per se, but I think this may have implications for your family history. It's difficult to say without further tests." Maya's pulse pounded in her ears. She could feel a knot of anxiety tightening in her chest, a gnawing fear that something was terribly, inexplicably wrong. She glanced at David, who was now watching Dr. Phillips with narrowed eyes, his hand gripping hers protectively. The silence that filled the room was thick with tension, a loaded pause as they all sat there, waiting for what would come next. Maya and David sat in silence as Dr. Phillips continued to speak, his words clinical but each syllable sharp and stinging. As he explained further, Maya found herself drifting, as if she were watching the conversation from a distance. Her heart was pounding, and the pit of her stomach felt hollow. David's hand, still gripping hers, was warm and solid, but the reassurance she usually felt in his presence was gone, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. "While genetic anomalies are common," Dr. Phillips was saying, "this particular finding suggests that there may be a variant present, which can sometimes point to unexpected ancestral backgrounds. In many cases, it's nothing more than a medical curiosity." Maya blinked, not fully comprehending. "What are you saying, Dr. Phillips? Ancestral background?" Dr. Phillips took a breath, as if gathering the words he knew would cut deep. "There are markers that can suggest genetic traits, often tracing back through multiple generations. And sometimes, these traits don't match what we'd expect based on our understanding of a family's immediate genetic history." David's voice cut through the fog in her mind, low and tense. "Are you suggesting that our child might not look like us? Like Maya and me?" Dr. Phillips hesitated. He looked from David to Maya with that same unreadable expression, one that seemed to weigh heavy with reluctance. "Yes. The markers we're seeing point to characteristics not typical of both of your ethnic backgrounds, specifically in pigmentation and phenotypic traits." Maya's mind struggled to wrap around this revelation. Her hand went instinctively to her belly, a defensive, protective gesture. The baby was already a part of her, bonded through every heartbeat, every fluttering kick. But David's grip on her hand loosened just slightly, almost imperceptibly, and she felt a tremor of panic rise within her. David turned to her, his face a mixture of confusion and something else, something raw and edged with anger. "Maya, how is this possible?" His words were barely above a whisper, but the accusation lingered beneath the surface, sharp and undeniable. Her throat went dry. "David, I don't understand." Her voice cracked, and she could feel tears prickling her eyes. "I have no idea what this means. I swear, there's nothing, no one, I don't understand what he's saying, either." Dr. Phillips cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "Look, these tests aren't perfect, and they don't imply anything with complete certainty. There are rare anomalies, and these can occur without any clear cause. I suggest that you speak with a genetic counselor who might provide more information. Maya looked down, her hands twisting nervously. Her world felt like it was splintering beneath her feet, each word tearing at the foundations of everything she thought she knew. She turned to David, desperate for understanding, for reassurance, but his expression was hard, his eyes distant. "David," she murmured, reaching out to touch his arm. "Please, you know me. I would never." "Then how do you explain this?" he asked sharply, his tone cutting through her plea. "How am I supposed to understand this, Maya? What else am I supposed to think?" She could barely hold back her tears. "I don't know. I'm just as confused as you are. There's no one else. I don't understand it either, but please believe me." Dr. Phillips's presence became almost an afterthought, his words fading into the background as Maya's world shrank down to the space between herself and David. He was the man she had loved with all of her heart, the father of her child. And yet, in this moment, she felt a cold distance between them, as if he were looking at her through a pane of glass, his trust slipping away with each heartbeat. David stood abruptly, his movements stiff, almost robotic. "I think I need a moment." "I can't," his voice faltered, and he took a step back, his gaze locked on her with a look she had never seen before. Maya reached for him, but he took another step back, just out of reach. The pain in his expression cut through her, deeper than any words could have. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there, hollow and alone. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was oppressive. Dr. Phillips cleared his throat again, uncomfortable in the charged aftermath. "Maya, if you need support, I can refer you to someone." She shook her head numbly. "Thank you, but I need to go after him." Ignoring the churning in her stomach, she rose to her feet and walked out of the office, her thoughts racing. She found David in the hallway, staring blankly at the wall, his face pale and tense. She reached out tentatively, her fingers hovering near his arm. "David. I don't know what's happening, but please, let's talk about this together. Please don't walk away." He turned to her slowly, his eyes searching her face as if trying to find something, anything, that would reassure him. But whatever he was looking for seemed to elude him, and his shoulders sagged with the weight of a betrayal he couldn't fully voice. "This doesn't make any sense, Maya," he said, his voice raw. "And if it doesn't make sense, then maybe there's something you're not telling me." Her heart shattered at his words, each one a dagger driven into the trust they had built. She swallowed, struggling to keep her voice steady. "David, I would never hide anything from you. I love you. I love this baby. I don't understand this either, but please believe me." He was silent, his gaze distant, and for the first time, Maya felt a deep, gnawing fear that she was losing him. The man she had built her life with, the father of her child, the anchor of her world, was slipping away, one agonizing moment at a time. David exhaled slowly, his expression softening just slightly, but the hurt was still there, a shadow that seemed etched into his features. "I need time, Maya. I need to think." She nodded, fighting back tears as she watched him walk down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Each step felt like the sound of something precious breaking beyond repair. Maya sat in the dim light of their living room later that night, her mind racing through fragments of the day's events. She had spent hours replaying Dr. Phillips' words, the stunned look on David's face, and his painful retreat from her. Her fingers pressed lightly against her belly as she whispered soothing words to her unborn child, but even those tender murmurs couldn't quell the ache in her heart. David had retreated into the guest room when they got home, saying he needed time to process everything. He barely looked at her. It was as if a wall had sprung up overnight between them, as thick and unyielding as his silence. Maya couldn't shake the sinking feeling that with each passing minute, David's trust was slipping further from her grasp. As she sat there, she heard the faint creak of the guest room door. David emerged, his face shadowed and weary, but his eyes held a determination that sent a chill through her. He crossed the room slowly, stopping just short of where she sat. She looked up at him, her heart pounding with both hope and trepidation. "Maya," he began, his voice low and hesitant. "I don't know how to say this, but I need answers. I can't just ignore this." She felt her pulse quicken, fear creeping up her spine. "David, I understand. I'm as lost as you are. I have no idea how this happened, but please, you have to believe me. I would never lie to you, not about something like this." He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze flickering as if he was caught between wanting to believe her and needing to make sense of the confusion clouding his mind. "Then what explanation do we have, Maya? Science doesn't lie. And right now, science is telling me there's something here that doesn't add up." The words cut deep, and Maya felt the familiar burn of tears welling up. She fought to keep them at bay, to hold herself steady. "David, sometimes these tests, they don't tell the whole story. There are anomalies, things that don't fit into neat boxes. Maybe this is just one of those things. Maybe." He exhaled slowly, doubt still etched across his face. "But I need more than maybe, Maya. I need to know, if there's any chance you're hiding something." His words landed like a physical blow, and she flinched, her chest tightening with a mixture of disbelief and hurt. "David, how can you even ask me that? After everything we've been through together?" He looked away, his jaw clenched. "I don't want to ask, but what am I supposed to think? The doctor suggested a genetic background that doesn't make sense. I want to believe you, but it feels like there's this huge gap in our lives that I don't understand." The tears she had been holding back spilled over, and she reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched his arm. "David, you are the only man I've ever loved. You're the father of this child. I swear to you, there's nothing, no one, else. Please, you have to trust me." He looked down at her hand, his expression softening for a moment as he considered her words. She held her breath, hoping, praying he would see her sincerity. But then he gently pulled his arm away, the distance between them feeling like an insurmountable chasm. "I want to trust you, Maya. But this, it's too big to ignore." He paused, the pain in his eyes evident. "I think we need to talk to a genetic counselor. Someone who can explain this in a way that makes sense. Maybe they can help us understand what's going on." Maya nodded, swallowing back her hurt. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, David. If a genetic counselor will help, then let's do it." He looked at her, his gaze lingering on her tear-streaked face. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a flicker of the warmth they once shared. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the unspoken doubts that lay between them. "All right. I'll set up an appointment tomorrow," he said quietly, his voice resigned. Without another word, he turned and walked back to the guest room, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts and fears. As the door clicked shut, Maya hugged herself tightly, feeling the weight of the silence that filled the house. She pressed her hands gently against her belly, trying to draw strength from the life growing inside her. But all she could feel was the aching void left by David's absence, a gaping wound that seemed impossible to heal. The next morning, David arranged an appointment with a genetic counselor, Dr. Louise Harris, who specialized in complex cases of genetic anomalies. As they sat in her office later that week, Maya felt a fresh wave of anxiety, her fingers interlacing tightly as she tried to steady her breath. David sat beside her, his posture stiff and his gaze fixed on a point across the room. Dr. Harris entered the room, a calm and composed woman with an air of reassurance that instantly put Maya slightly at ease. She offered a kind smile as she settled across from them, a folder of documents in her hands. "Thank you both for coming in today," Dr. Harris began, her voice gentle but confident. I understand that you're here because there were some unexpected results from an earlier test. David nodded, glancing briefly at Maya. Yes. The results suggested something that didn't quite match up with what we expected. Dr. Harris nodded understandingly, opening the folder and scanning its contents. Genetic markers can sometimes give us information that's difficult to interpret, especially when it comes to traits that may not immediately appear consistent with one's perceived ancestry. Maya leaned forward, her eyes searching Dr. Harris's face for any sign of clarity or reassurance. Dr. Harris, we're both very confused by what we were told. We don't know how this happened, and it's creating a lot of tension between us. Dr. Harris regarded them thoughtfully. That's understandable. Genetic information can be very personal and deeply impactful. Sometimes, when we dig deeper into these markers, we uncover complex ancestral patterns that aren't obvious. Genetic markers can be passed down through generations in ways that don't always match up with visible traits or family history. Maya felt a glimmer of hope at her words. So, you're saying that it's possible, this could be a genetic anomaly from a distant ancestor? Something that doesn't reflect either of our immediate family backgrounds? Dr. Harris nodded. Absolutely. It's possible that an inherited marker from a more distant lineage could manifest, even if it hasn't been visible in several generations. David's expression softened slightly, as if Dr. Harris's words were beginning to ease the knot of doubt that had taken root in his heart. So, we don't have to assume the worst, he asked, his voice tinged with both relief and hesitation. Dr. Harris offered a sympathetic smile. Not necessarily. In fact, it's quite common to see this sort of genetic variance. I'll recommend some additional testing that can help us trace these markers more accurately and give you a better understanding of their origins. Maya reached for David's hand, and this time, he didn't pull away. She felt a faint glimmer of hope, a small crack in the wall of distrust that had sprung up between them. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe, clinging to the possibility that this nightmare might have a reasonable explanation, one that could help heal the wound threatening to unravel the love they had fought so hard to build. Maya and David left Dr. Harris's office feeling somewhat reassured. Though the counselor's words offered a logical explanation for the test results, an undeniable tension lingered between them. They had agreed to undergo further testing, hoping it would shed light on the mystery that had clouded their happiness. But even with a glimmer of hope, Maya knew it would take time for trust to be fully restored. As they walked to the car, David slipped his hand into Maya's, giving it a gentle squeeze. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Maya held on to his hand, as if it was an anchor in the storm of uncertainty that had taken over their lives. The car ride home was quiet, yet there was an unspoken understanding between them, a mutual acknowledgement that they were, for now, still in this together. That night, Maya found herself lying awake long after David had fallen asleep. His breathing was steady, a soft rhythm that usually comforted her, but tonight it only highlighted the space between them. She shifted carefully, afraid to disturb him, and glanced down at her growing belly. She had dreamed of this child, imagined a future filled with love and laughter. She had never anticipated that something as technical as genetics could become a force capable of tearing them apart. The following days were filled with a strange mix of routines and silences. At work, Maya tried to lose herself in her tasks, but her thoughts constantly drifted back to David and the child growing inside her. Every time a coworker congratulated her on the pregnancy, she forced a smile, wishing she could share the joy she felt in those early weeks. At home, she noticed David spending more time in the guest room. He would retreat there under the pretense of needing extra sleep or to work on some project, but she knew it was more than that. The guest room had become a sanctuary where he could wrestle with his doubts alone. One evening, as Maya prepared dinner, she heard David moving about in the guest room. She hadn't realized how quiet their interactions had become until she found herself waiting, hoping he would join her in the kitchen. When he finally appeared, he looked hesitant, his hands fidgeting at his sides. "Can I help with anything?" he asked, his tone more cautious than usual. Maya looked over her shoulder, surprised but grateful. "Sure, you can cut the vegetables if you want." David nodded, stepping up to the counter. They worked side by side in silence, each focused on their task, yet acutely aware of the other's presence. Maya found comfort in the quiet, in the shared rhythm of chopping and stirring, as if they were slowly rebuilding a sense of normalcy. After a while, David cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Maya. I've been thinking. About what Dr. Harris said." She paused, setting down her spoon. "What about it?" He hesitated, his eyes fixed on the vegetables in front of him. "I want to believe there's a logical explanation. That this is just a genetic anomaly like she mentioned. But I keep wondering if maybe there's something I missed, something I should have known." Maya's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. "David, I understand how confusing this is. I've questioned everything myself. But I know there's no one else. You're the father of this child, no one else could ever take your place." He nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I want to believe you, Maya. I really do. But there's this part of me that's afraid that I'll never be able to fully let go of this doubt." Maya reached out, placing her hand over his. "I know it's hard. But we're doing everything we can to find answers. We have to hold on to that." David looked down at their hands, his face softening. "You're right," he murmured. "It's just. I didn't think something like this could shake us like it has." They finished preparing dinner, and for the first time in days, they ate together in relative peace. It was a fragile peace, like a truce held together by the thin thread of hope. They didn't discuss the tests or the counselor, and for a brief moment, it felt like they were just David and Maya again, sharing a meal as they had so many times before. But later that night, as they lay in bed, David turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maya, do you think, maybe we should tell our families?" Maya's breath hitched at the suggestion. The thought of bringing their families into this painful chapter felt overwhelming. Her mother had been so excited about becoming a grandmother, how could she explain the strain that had settled over her marriage? "I don't know, David," she replied, her voice uncertain. "I don't think they'd understand. They'd have questions we don't even have answers to." He nodded, his gaze drifting away. "You're probably right. But maybe it would help to have someone else's perspective. We don't have to go through this alone." Maya sighed, closing her eyes. She wanted to lean on someone, to pour her heart out and seek comfort. But the fear of judgment, of people misinterpreting or doubting her intentions, held her back. She felt trapped between her love for David and the overwhelming isolation this ordeal had brought upon her. In the days that followed, Maya and David began preparing themselves for the results of the additional testing. Each day felt like a small eternity, stretched thin by the anticipation of what they might learn. The anxiety gnawed at Maya, her mind a constant storm of worst-case scenarios and unanswered questions. One afternoon, as she was organizing files at work, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and felt her heart skip. It was a message from Dr. Harris's office. "The results are ready. Please schedule an appointment at your earliest convenience." Maya stared at the message, her hands suddenly trembling. The moment she had been both dreading and anticipating was finally here. She quickly forwarded the message to David, her pulse racing. He replied almost immediately, suggesting they meet at Dr. Harris's office after work. She felt a rush of relief that he was taking the initiative, but it was tinged with an underlying fear. What if the results only deepened the divide between them? When they arrived at Dr. Harris's office later that day, Maya's nerves were raw. She clutched David's hand as they waited, his grip surprisingly strong, almost as if he were holding onto her for reassurance. Despite everything, there was a sense of unity between them, a silent agreement that they would face whatever came next together. Dr. Harris entered the room, her expression calm but serious. She took a seat across from them, her eyes scanning over the test results in her hand before looking up to meet their gaze. "Thank you both for coming in," she began gently. "I know this has been a difficult process for you, and I appreciate your patience as we work through these tests." Maya tightened her grip on David's hand, bracing herself. She could feel his tension beside her, his own breath shallow with anticipation. Dr. Harris continued, her voice steady. "The results have confirmed a few things, and I believe I can provide you with a better understanding of what's been happening." Maya's pulse quickened as she leaned forward, her eyes locked onto Dr. Harris, searching for any sign of reassurance in her expression. "What we've found," Dr. Harris began, "is that there are indeed markers in your child's genetic makeup that reflect a lineage not directly tied to either of your recent family histories. This is what initially caused the unusual results." David frowned, his gaze intent on the doctor. "So, what does that mean exactly?" Dr. Harris smiled softly. "It means that there's a unique ancestral component here, one that may have remained dormant or unexpressed for several generations. It's not unusual, though it is rare for it to show up so distinctly. Essentially, this genetic trait could be a recessive marker, something that's been quietly passed down until now." A wave of relief washed over Maya, and she felt the tightness in her chest begin to ease. She looked at David, hoping he felt the same reassurance, but his face remained guarded, his gaze still fixed on Dr. Harris. "So, there's no need to question," he trailed off, glancing at Maya, his voice softer, almost hesitant. Dr. Harris shook her head, her voice kind. "No. This is simply a natural part of human genetic variation. And while it may be surprising, it's certainly not something to worry about." David exhaled, his shoulders visibly relaxing. He looked over at Maya, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw a glimmer of warmth in his eyes. They thanked Dr. Harris and left the office, a new sense of understanding settling between them. The air felt lighter, the burden of doubt finally lifting, and as they walked out together, Maya felt David's hand slide into hers, strong and reassuring. She looked up at him, a smile breaking across her face, and saw his own tentative smile in return. The journey had shaken them, but in that moment, Maya knew they were ready to rebuild. They had faced the shadows of doubt, and together, they had come out on the other side, still hand in hand. As they drove home from Dr. Harris's office, the relief of clarity hung in the car like a quiet breath of fresh air. Maya gazed out the window, watching the city blur past, her mind beginning to settle. The explanation had been unexpected yet deeply reassuring. But she couldn't ignore the sense of fragility that remained between her and David, as if the wounds of doubt still lingered beneath the surface. David broke the silence, his voice softer than she had heard in weeks. "Maya. I'm so sorry. For doubting you, for everything." She turned to him, her heart swelling at his apology, yet also aching from the memory of all they'd been through. "I understand why you questioned it, David. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for you too." He glanced at her, a mix of regret and admiration in his eyes. "I should have trusted you, trusted us, but I let my fears get the best of me. I never wanted to hurt you like that." Maya took a deep breath, acknowledging the pain they both felt. "This whole situation tested us in ways we couldn't have prepared for. But what matters now is that we're here, together, moving forward." As they pulled into the driveway, a sense of calm settled over them. They walked into their home with an unspoken understanding, ready to rebuild the foundation that had been shaken but not destroyed. That night, after a quiet dinner, David suggested they go for a walk in the neighborhood. It was a gesture Maya cherished, something they used to do often but had lost in the whirlwind of stress. As they strolled down the dimly lit street, she felt a sense of peace begin to seep in, filling the cracks left behind by the tension. David reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers, and they walked in silence, appreciating the stillness around them. After a while, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know, there was a moment when I was so scared I'd lose you, because of my own doubts. And I hated myself for it. Maya squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of his confession. I was afraid too, David. I was scared of what those doubts could do to us. But I never stopped loving you. I want you to know that. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes filled with an intensity that took her by surprise. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Maya. But I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make this right. To make sure you know how much I love and trust you. Maya looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotion. David, it's going to take time. But I believe we can get through this, as long as we're honest with each other. He nodded, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Then that's exactly what I'll do. The days that followed marked a subtle yet significant shift between them. They began to rekindle the intimacy and trust that had once been the backbone of their relationship. David made a concerted effort to be present, checking in with her throughout the day, and offering gestures of affection that reminded Maya of the early days of their relationship. One evening, he surprised her with a bouquet of her favorite flowers, lilies and sunflowers, and set the table with a candle at dinner. The sight brought tears to her eyes, a reminder of how far they had come in such a short time. This is beautiful, David, she said, as they sat down to eat. She felt a surge of warmth in her chest, a renewed sense of gratitude for the man she had chosen to spend her life with. I wanted to remind you of how much you mean to me, he replied, reaching across the table to hold her hand. I don't want you to ever doubt that again. Their conversations became deeper, often stretching late into the night as they shared thoughts, fears, and dreams for their growing family. The bond they were rebuilding felt even stronger, fortified by the resilience they had discovered within themselves and each other. One Sunday morning, while they were sitting together on the porch, Maya felt a faint flutter in her belly, a soft, unmistakable movement. She gasped, looking down, her hands instinctively resting on her stomach. David noticed her reaction immediately. Maya, what is it? She looked up at him, her eyes shining with joy. I felt the baby move, David. He moved closer, placing his hand on her belly, a look of awe spreading across his face as he waited to feel the tiny movements. And then, after a moment, he felt it too, a gentle kick that seemed almost like a greeting. David's face broke into a grin, his eyes welling up as he looked at her. That's our little one, he murmured, his voice filled with wonder. They sat together, savoring the moment, their hands joined on her belly. It was a small, magical experience that reminded them of the love they shared, a love that was now embodied in the tiny life growing within her. As the weeks passed, they began to embrace the joy of their pregnancy once more. David was attentive and caring, joining her at every doctor's appointment, and eagerly listening to each update. He took an active role in preparing the nursery, painting the walls a soft shade of lavender and setting up the crib with careful attention to detail. Maya watched him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude for the man who was fully committed to being a father. The shadows of doubt that had once clouded their relationship had faded, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and unity. One evening, as they lay in bed, David wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. I can't wait to meet our little one, Maya. To show them the love and strength that's brought us here. She nestled into his embrace, her heart full. Neither can I, David. And I know that, no matter what, we're going to be the best parents we can be. The trials they had faced had not been easy, but Maya realized that they had emerged stronger, with a deeper understanding of each other. The journey of rebuilding their trust had transformed their relationship, grounding it in a resilience that could withstand any challenge. As they looked forward to the arrival of their child, Maya felt a quiet confidence settle within her. They had come through a storm together, and she knew, without a doubt, that they were ready for whatever lay ahead. As Maya and David's relationship strengthened, life seemed to settle into a rhythm of peace and preparation for their new addition. Every day felt like a small victory, a step closer to the family they dreamed of. But just as they had found their way back to each other, an unexpected revelation would soon come, threatening to stir their newfound calm. One afternoon, Maya was organizing some documents in her home office. With the baby's arrival approaching, she wanted to ensure everything was in order, from financial plans to medical records and the necessary paperwork. She sifted through stacks of old files, sorting out what was needed and what could be discarded. As she pulled out a thick manila envelope, a small, folded piece of paper slipped out and fluttered to the floor. Curiously, she picked it up, realizing it was an old letter, one she didn't recognize. Opening it, she quickly scanned the first few lines, her heart beginning to pound as she read on. The letter was addressed to David, written in a neat, unfamiliar handwriting. It was brief, just a few lines, but the message struck her like a lightning bolt, a woman claiming she had recently learned she had a child, David's child, born years before Maya and David had even met. Maya's heart raced, each word sinking deeper into her mind. The letter had been sent just months ago. She read and reread it, trying to process what this meant. Had David known about this? The tone of the letter seemed tentative, as though the writer herself wasn't sure of the information. She felt a flurry of emotions rising within her, confusion, hurt and a touch of anger. David had never mentioned anything like this, and the thought that he might have kept it hidden from her made her feel an ache that she hadn't experienced in months. At that moment, David walked in, carrying a small box of baby items he had picked up that morning. His smile faded as he saw Maya's expression, the letter clutched tightly in her hand. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern flooding his face. Maya looked up at him, her gaze steady yet filled with pain. She held out the letter, watching as David's expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to a deep, almost guilty silence as he took it from her. David sank into a nearby chair, his hand running through his hair as he reread the words. "Maya, I didn't know how to tell you about this. I didn't even believe it myself. David, who is this woman? And why didn't you tell me?" Maya's voice was calm but edged with the hurt she was trying to suppress. David looked up, regret evident in his eyes. "Her name is Lila. She was someone I dated briefly, years before we met. I hadn't heard from her in ages, so when this letter arrived, it just didn't seem possible. I didn't want to upset you with something that might not even be true. But she says she has a child, your child." Maya's voice trembled. "David, I thought we were past hiding things from each other." He sighed, visibly shaken. "I know. I should have told you, Maya. I just didn't know how to even approach this without hurting you, especially now." The weight of his words fell between them, creating an unspoken distance that neither wanted but couldn't ignore. For a long moment, they sat in silence, each processing what this revelation meant. After what felt like an eternity, Maya finally spoke. "David, I need to know the truth. I need to know if there's any possibility that this could be real." David nodded, his gaze steady. "You're right. We both deserve to know the truth. If there's any chance that this child exists, I owe it to them to find out." The next day, David made a call to the number listed at the bottom of the letter. His hands trembled as he held the phone, the uncertainty gnawing at him. After a few rings, a woman's voice answered, soft, hesitant, yet with a familiarity that struck him instantly. "Hello, this is Lila," she said. David cleared his throat. "Lila, it's David. I got your letter, Anne. I need to understand what you meant. Are you sure about this?" There was a brief silence on the line, as if she were gathering her thoughts. Then she replied, "Yes, David. I know this must come as a shock to you. It was a shock to me too. But I recently learned I had a son, and after looking into it, well, I believe he's yours." David felt his heart pounding, each word settling in his mind like a foreign language he couldn't fully grasp. But why now? Why didn't I know about this before? Lila sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know, David. I didn't know I was even pregnant when we parted ways. I only found out recently, and the adoption agency didn't have any information on you until now. David's mind was reeling, the information overwhelming. He didn't know what to say or how to process it all. I need to meet him. I need to understand everything. Of course, Lila replied, her tone softening. I thought you might. I'll set up a meeting, and we can go from there. When David hung up, he turned to Maya, who had been watching him intently. Her face was a mix of apprehension and support, and he could see how much she was struggling with this unexpected turn. Well? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. David took a deep breath. She says he's my son. That she didn't know until recently. We're meeting with him soon. The gravity of the situation hit them both, but Maya nodded, determination in her gaze. If this is part of your life, then it's part of our life too. We'll face this together. As the day of the meeting approached, Maya and David prepared themselves emotionally. The anticipation of meeting the child, a young boy, whose existence they hadn't even known about days ago, filled them with a strange mix of anxiety and hope. David couldn't shake the feeling that his past had resurfaced in the most unexpected way, and he was both nervous and eager to face this unknown part of himself. When they arrived at the agreed location, a quiet park, chosen for its calm and seclusion, they saw Lila standing by a bench, holding the hand of a young boy with David's unmistakable eyes. David's breath caught, emotions overwhelming him as he took in the sight. Maya, sensing his tension, placed a comforting hand on his arm, grounding him in the moment. As they approached, the boy looked up at them, a curious glint in his eyes. David knelt down, his heart racing, a mixture of fear and love swirling inside him. He smiled softly, feeling a profound sense of connection with this child he had just met. Hi, David said, his voice barely steady. I'm David. The boy gave a shy smile, glancing from his mother to Maya and back to David. Hi, he replied, his voice soft but clear. As they sat down together, David felt a sense of peace begin to settle. The journey of discovering this new reality was only beginning, but he knew, with Maya by his side, he was ready to embrace it. The days following the initial meeting were filled with a cascade of emotions and conversations that neither David nor Maya had anticipated. Maya could see that David was deeply affected by the discovery of his son, who was named Jacob. He seemed to carry an unspoken weight in every gesture, and while they shared moments of happiness and anticipation, she also sensed a distance, one of confusion, guilt, and the overwhelming reality of being a father to a child he had never known. David spent countless hours replaying the brief meeting with Jacob in his mind. He thought about the shy smile, the slight nervousness, and the sense of connection he felt in just those few words exchanged. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wanted to make up for lost time, to be there for Jacob in ways he had missed out on. But there was also an undeniable fear: how would his relationship with Maya be affected by this new chapter? One evening, as the two sat together on the couch in the quiet of their living room, David finally voiced his thoughts. Maya, I want you to know how much this means to me, to have you here with me through this. I know this wasn't what either of us planned, and I don't want this to be something that comes between us. Maya looked at him, her eyes soft but resolute. David, I know this is important for you, and it's important for me too. We're building a life together, and Jacob is now part of that life. I won't lie and say it's been easy to accept, but I'm here for you. I'm here for us. David reached for her hand, holding it tightly as he exhaled, feeling a sense of relief. Yet Maya could still feel the subtle tension between them, and she wondered if he was as aware of it as she was. She didn't doubt her commitment, but the thought of navigating this new and uncertain dynamic was daunting. 2 weeks later, David arranged another meeting with Lila and Jacob, this time hoping to establish a more consistent presence in Jacob's life. He had discussed it with Maya, who supported him fully, even though the idea of David spending time with Lila brought a quiet pang she didn't express. Lila, too, seemed cautious but willing to open up to the possibility of a co-parenting relationship. When they met at a small cafe, David noticed how nervous Lila looked, glancing at him and then to Jacob, who was seated beside her, quietly sipping on a hot chocolate. David felt an ache seeing his son's innocent expression, the unspoken understanding that this was just as new and confusing for him. After a few moments of casual conversation, David turned to Jacob. "Jacob, would you like to go to the park with me sometime? Maybe we can play soccer or just hang out." Jacob's face lit up with a smile, and he nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, that sounds fun." Lila smiled softly, looking at David with an expression of both gratitude and relief. "I think he'd love that. He's been asking me about you every day since we met." Hearing this, David's heart swelled, realizing just how deeply he wanted to be a part of Jacob's life. He couldn't deny the powerful sense of responsibility and care that surged within him. As they discussed the logistics of future meetings, Lila's gaze grew more serious. She lowered her voice slightly. "David, there's something I want to talk about. Jacob has been asking about family. About why he doesn't have a dad like other kids. I haven't told him the full story yet, but I think he deserves to know, at least some of it." David listened, his heart tightening. He hadn't thought about the complexities Jacob might be facing, about how the absence of a father could shape a child's perspective. He felt a surge of guilt, wondering how different Jacob's life might have been had he known from the start. "I want him to know I'm here for him, no matter what," David replied. "But I also want to take it slow, give him time to understand." Lila nodded. "I agree. I'm here to support him through it all, and I appreciate you stepping into this role, David. It's more than I could have hoped for." David nodded, his eyes meeting hers, and in that moment, he realized the magnitude of what lay ahead. It wasn't just about him and Jacob, it was also about building trust and support for both Lila and Maya, creating a new version of family that held space for everyone involved. When David returned home that evening, he sat down with Maya, recounting the meeting in his conversation with Lila. As he spoke, he noticed Maya's quiet attentiveness, her expression a mix of support and reflection. "Maya," he said gently, "I know this is a lot for both of us. I want to make sure that I'm here with you through this, that we're navigating it together." Maya nodded, reaching for his hand. "I know, David. And I want you to know I'm here for you, too. But I also want us to keep communicating, to make sure we're both okay." David nodded, feeling the weight of her words. The conversation was a reminder of the importance of transparency, of acknowledging their individual feelings as they ventured through this uncharted territory. They were a team, but each had their own emotions and questions. In the days that followed, David began spending time with Jacob more regularly. He would take him to the park, where they would play soccer or share quiet moments on the swings. Jacob's laughter and joy brought out a tenderness in David that Maya hadn't seen before. Each day was a new discovery, and though it brought its challenges, David felt a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment. Maya, however, couldn't ignore the pangs of insecurity that occasionally surfaced. While she was overjoyed for David and his newfound connection with Jacob, there were times when she felt an uncomfortable loneliness, a sense of distance that she hadn't anticipated. She reminded herself of her commitment to David and her role in their life together, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was a piece of David now dedicated to someone else, a piece she would never fully understand. One evening, Maya and David sat on the porch together, enjoying the cool night air. She finally gathered the courage to voice her thoughts. "David," she began, her voice hesitant, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've been so patient and dedicated with Jacob, and I know how much this means to you." David looked at her, sensing the weight in her words. "Maya, thank you. That means everything to me. I know this hasn't been easy for you." Maya took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "It hasn't been, but it's not because of Jacob or even Lila. It's just, sometimes I feel like I'm on the outside, watching you build something beautiful that I can't fully be a part of. And it's hard, knowing there's a part of you that belongs to him now, too. David's face softened, understanding the vulnerability in her words. He reached out, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. Maya, you're still my everything. This hasn't changed that. He paused, his gaze steady. Jacob is my son, yes, but you're my partner, my anchor. And I want you to know that our life, our family, it's still the center of my world. Maya looked up at him, her heart settling as his words washed over her. She felt a renewed sense of commitment, a reminder of the strength they had cultivated together. Thank you, David, she whispered, leaning into him. I needed to hear that. In the quiet of that evening, Maya and David held each other, both understanding that their journey had shifted but that they were willing to navigate this new reality together. It wasn't perfect, and they knew challenges would continue to arise. But in that moment, they reaffirmed their bond, determined to build a future that held space for everyone they loved, including a little boy named Jacob who had already changed their lives in the most unexpected of ways. In the weeks that followed, David and Jacob settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as it was new. They had created little traditions, Saturday morning park visits, ice cream stops, and story time at the local library. It was becoming a cherished part of David's week, moments that reminded him how precious fatherhood could be, even if it had arrived in such an unexpected way. Maya, meanwhile, was working on embracing her role in this new family structure. She had started joining David and Jacob on some of their outings, carefully balancing her role as David's partner and as a potential friend to Jacob. She wanted to build a bond with him without overstepping, mindful that she was a new presence in his life. One Saturday morning, David invited Maya to join him and Jacob at the park for a picnic. It was a beautiful, sunny day, and the park was buzzing with families. Maya noticed the joyful energy that filled the air, feeling her heart warm as she watched David and Jacob chase each other across the grass, laughing freely. She loved seeing David like this, carefree, happy, fully immersed in the moment with his son. As they sat together on a blanket, unpacking their picnic, Maya carefully engaged Jacob, trying to get to know him in ways that felt natural. Jacob, do you have a favorite book? Maya asked, smiling as she poured juice into his cup. Jacob thought for a moment, his eyes lighting up. I love Where the Wild Things Are. My mom reads it to me all the time. Oh, I love that book too. Maya replied, her face lighting up. Maybe sometime I can read it to you too. Jacob nodded, and for the first time, Maya saw him looking at her with a flicker of trust. It was a small step, but it was meaningful. In that moment, Maya felt like she was beginning to find her place in Jacob's world. After lunch, David excused himself to take a phone call, leaving Maya and Jacob alone on the blanket. She felt a bit of nervousness creeping in but reminded herself that this was just a natural part of connecting with him. So, Jacob, she said, shifting a bit to face him, what else do you like to do for fun? Jacob looked at her with a shy smile. I like drawing. My mom says I'm pretty good at it. Maya's eyes lit up. Drawing? That's wonderful. You know, I love drawing too. Maybe we could do some drawing together sometime. What do you like to draw the most? Monsters, Jacob replied with a grin, clearly proud of his art. Big, scary ones. But sometimes they're nice monsters. Maya chuckled. I'd love to see them sometime. I bet they're amazing. Their conversation flowed easily, and Maya felt her nerves slowly dissolve. Jacob seemed to be warming up to her, and as they continued to chat, she felt an undeniable sense of connection. In those moments, she began to see herself not just as David's partner but as a figure in Jacob's life, too, a friend and supporter, someone who wanted to help him feel safe and valued. When David returned, he watched from a distance as Maya and Jacob laughed together, and he felt a surge of gratitude. Maya had stepped into this role with patience and openness, and seeing her with Jacob filled him with a sense of completeness he hadn't known he was missing. As the afternoon sun began to dip, the three of them gathered their things and started walking toward the parking lot. David took Maya's hand, his gaze soft and full of appreciation. "Thank you," he murmured, squeezing her hand. "For being here, for making the effort with Jacob. It means so much to me." Maya smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "He's a wonderful kid, David. I feel lucky to get to know him." David's face softened, and for the first time, he felt like they were truly on the same path, that they were bridging the worlds of their individual lives and creating something new and beautiful together. The following week, however, introduced a new challenge. Lila called David, her tone tense and serious. "David, I need to talk to you about something important," she said, her voice hinting at urgency. "What's going on?" David asked, concerned. "There's been some tension with Jacob at school," Lila explained. "He's been struggling with some kids in his class who are teasing him. They're saying things about him not having a real dad, and calling him names." David's heart sank, anger and sadness flooding him simultaneously. The idea of Jacob facing bullying over something as painful as his family's situation was more than he could bear. He knew how hard it could be for a child to navigate complex emotions, and the last thing he wanted was for Jacob to feel isolated or judged. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Lila," he replied, feeling a wave of helplessness. "I'll talk to him about it, and we'll figure out a way to support him through this." That evening, David met with Jacob for their usual outing, but this time his heart was heavier than usual. As they sat on a park bench, David broached the subject gently. "Jacob, your mom mentioned you've had a tough time with some kids at school," he began, his voice soft and understanding. Jacob looked down, his face tightening. "They're just mean. They say I don't have a dad like everyone else." David felt a lump in his throat, reaching out to gently place a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "I know that must hurt, Jacob. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, and no matter what anyone else says, you're not alone." Jacob glanced up, a hint of tears in his eyes. "Why did you only come now?" David's heart broke at the question, and he took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Jacob, I didn't know about you until recently. But now that I do, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be by your side, always." Jacob nodded slowly, his small hand reaching out to hold David's. They sat in silence, the words between them speaking to a new understanding, a growing bond that neither of them could deny. When David shared the conversation with Maya later that night, he couldn't hold back his emotions. She listened quietly, her hand resting on his back as he poured out his fears and hopes for Jacob. "Maya, I don't want him to feel like he's any less because of me, because I wasn't there sooner," he whispered. Maya wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. "David, you're doing everything you can. Jacob can see that. Just be there for him, and over time, he'll feel it. He'll know you're here to stay." In the quiet of that moment, David realized that his journey with Jacob was only beginning, and with Maya by his side, he felt stronger and more grounded. He wasn't just building a relationship with his son, he was also growing, learning how to be the father Jacob deserved. But he knew that challenges still lay ahead. He was determined to show Jacob that he was committed, not just through words but through every action, every moment they shared. As the days passed, David focused intently on Jacob, pouring energy and love into their bond. He was determined to shield Jacob from the hurtful words of others and ensure that he felt valued and secure. They spent afternoons working on art projects together, drawing monsters just like Jacob liked, and even creating their own comic book adventures. It was David's way of showing Jacob that he was there for him, that they could build their own world together, one filled with creativity and laughter. However, the pain of Jacob's bullying weighed heavily on David's heart. It was difficult for him to know that while they were creating positive memories, Jacob was also facing the harsh realities of childhood. David decided it was time to take action, not only for Jacob but also to educate the other kids about respect and acceptance. One evening, While sitting at the kitchen table, David asked Jacob, "How would you feel about talking to your class about what's been happening? Maybe if they understand how you feel, it could help them be nicer." Jacob looked up, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "I don't know, Dad. What if they laugh at me?" David leaned closer, gently brushing his hand through Jacob's hair. "They might, but it could also help them understand. Sometimes kids just don't know better. But you are so brave, and I know you can do this. And remember, I'll be right there with you." After a moment's hesitation, Jacob nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll try." The next day, David reached out to Jacob's teacher, Ms. Martinez, to discuss the possibility of organizing a class meeting. She was supportive and immediately understood the need to create a safe space for Jacob to share his experiences. Together, they set a date for the following week, and David felt a mix of nerves and hope as he prepared for the moment. On the day of the presentation, Jacob and David arrived at school early. Jacob's small hands trembled as he clutched the folder with his drawings and notes. David squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "You've got this, buddy. Just speak from your heart." As they walked into the classroom, David took a deep breath, taking in the sight of the other children. Some were playing, while others chatted in groups, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing within Jacob. Ms. Martinez gathered the students, calling them to their seats, and David noticed Jacob's eyes darting around, searching for familiar faces, both excited and apprehensive. Once everyone settled down, Ms. Martinez introduced David and Jacob. "Today, we're going to have a special discussion. Jacob has something important to share with all of you." Jacob stood beside David, his small frame seeming even smaller under the watchful gaze of his classmates. David whispered, "Just remember, you're not alone. I'm right here." Jacob took a deep breath and began. "Hi, everyone. I'm Jacob. Some of you might know that I have a different family situation. I have a dad, but I didn't meet him until recently." A murmur went through the classroom, and David's heart raced. He could see the confusion on the faces of some kids, but he also spotted a few who looked genuinely interested. Jacob continued, his voice steadying as he spoke about the teasing and how it made him feel isolated and sad. "When you call me names, it hurts my feelings. I'm still the same person, no matter what my family looks like," Jacob explained, his eyes now focused on his classmates, searching for understanding. "I just want to play and be friends. I don't want anyone to feel alone like I did." The room fell silent, the weight of Jacob's words hanging in the air. David felt a swell of pride as he watched his son find his voice. The other kids began to listen intently, some shifting in their seats, looking guilty or remorseful. As Jacob spoke about his interests, drawing, playing soccer, and his favorite cartoons, David could see the curiosity building among the classmates. A hand shot up from the back of the room. It was Emily, one of the girls who had teased Jacob. "I'm sorry, Jacob. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought it was funny." Jacob nodded, his expression softening. "I know, but it really hurt my feelings. I just want everyone to be nice to each other." At that moment, David felt a shift in the atmosphere. It was as if the walls around Jacob were coming down, allowing his classmates to see him for who he truly was, a vibrant, creative kid who just wanted to fit in. Ms. Martinez encouraged other students to share their thoughts, and one by one, the children began to express their feelings. They talked about how they sometimes struggled with understanding differences and how they wanted to be better friends. The dialogue was emotional and enlightening, and by the end of the session, David felt a surge of hope. Jacob had not only found his voice but had also created a ripple effect of understanding among his peers. As the class wrapped up, David hugged Jacob tightly, pride swelling in his chest. "You did it. I'm so proud of you, buddy. You were amazing." "I didn't think it would feel like that," Jacob admitted, his eyes sparkling with newfound confidence. "I felt brave." David beamed at him. "You are brave. And remember, you're never alone in this. We'll face everything together. After school, as they walked home hand in hand, Jacob seemed lighter, his steps buoyant. Do you think they'll stop being mean now? He asked hopefully. I think you showed them that being different is okay, David replied. And sometimes it just takes a little courage to make a big difference. Later that evening, as they sat at the dinner table with Maya, Jacob excitedly recounted his day, his words spilling out in an enthusiastic rush. Maya listened, her heart swelling with pride for both David and Jacob. You were so brave, Jacob. I'm proud of you, she said, beaming at him. David could see how the day's events had transformed Jacob's spirit. It was more than just a conversation, it was a moment of empowerment, and it had opened the door to healing for all of them. That night, as Jacob climbed into bed, David tucked him in and leaned down to whisper, I love you, Jacob. No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. I love you too, Dad, Jacob replied, his eyes fluttering as he fought off sleep. Can we draw monsters tomorrow? Absolutely, David promised, ruffling Jacob's hair as he turned off the light, a smile lingering on his face. As he closed the door and walked back down the hall, David felt a renewed sense of hope. They were building something beautiful together, a bond that could withstand any storm. And for the first time in a long while, David felt a profound sense of belonging, both for himself and for Jacob. Their journey was just beginning, but with each step, they were finding their way through the complexities of love, family, and acceptance. Days turned into weeks, and the impact of Jacob's brave presentation rippled through the school like a gentle wave, changing the way students interacted with each other. While some kids were still learning to navigate their feelings about Jacob's family situation, the majority of his classmates showed a marked improvement in their behavior. Jacob was greeted with smiles instead of whispers, and laughter replaced the mocking tones that had once shadowed him. David watched with pride as Jacob's confidence blossomed. He seemed lighter, more engaged, and even began to take the initiative in class activities. The art projects they had worked on together evolved from simple drawings to complex stories filled with vibrant characters, reflecting Jacob's imaginative spirit. Each night, they created new stories, often about a superhero named Captain Courage, who fought for kindness and understanding. One afternoon, after school, Jacob bounded into the house, his backpack bouncing against his back. Dad! You won't believe what happened today, he exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. David put down his book and turned to him, curiosity piqued. What happened, buddy? I got invited to Sarah's birthday party. She said she wants me to be her special guest. Jacob's voice was filled with joy, but there was a slight edge of apprehension lingering beneath the surface. David's heart swelled. Sarah was one of the girls from Jacob's class who had been supportive after the presentation. That's fantastic. Are you excited? Yeah, but what if some of the kids who were mean before are there? I don't want to be teased again, Jacob confessed, his enthusiasm dimming slightly. David knelt down to Jacob's level, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. You are so brave, Jacob. If anyone is mean to you, remember what we talked about. You can stand up for yourself, and I'll be right there with you. Jacob nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Okay, Dad. I'll try. The day of the party arrived, and David watched as Jacob dressed in his favorite shirt, a bright blue one with a cartoon robot on it. He was nervous but also excited, ready to celebrate with friends. David felt a mix of pride and anxiety as they made their way to Sarah's house. As they approached the vibrant decorations adorning the entrance, Jacob hesitated. David sensed his hesitation and knelt beside him. You ready to go in? Jacob took a deep breath, his small chest rising and falling. Yeah. I'm ready, he declared, determination lighting up his eyes. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with laughter and chatter, kids running around, playing games, and enjoying the spread of snacks. Sarah spotted Jacob and ran over, her smile brightening the room. Jacob! I'm so glad you came, she exclaimed, wrapping him in a warm hug. As they joined the other kids, David observed Jacob's transformation. He was laughing and engaging with Sarah's friends, a group that seemed eager to include him. But in the back of his mind, the fear of rejection lingered. Throughout the party, David kept a watchful eye on Jacob, ready to step in if necessary. To his relief, Jacob was embraced by the group, and even the children who had teased him seemed to be making an effort to be kind. When it was time for games, Jacob was included in every round, cheering and laughing along with his friends. However, as the party progressed, David noticed a small group of boys huddled together, casting glances at Jacob. His heart sank when he recognized them as some of the kids who had previously bullied him. Their whispers echoed in the background, and David's protective instincts kicked in. "Hey, Jacob," one of the boys, Tyler, called out, a hint of mischief in his tone. "You think you're cool now just because you had a talk with everyone?" The atmosphere grew tense, and David stepped forward, prepared to intervene, but he held back to see how Jacob would respond. He wanted Jacob to stand up for himself, to assert his newfound strength. Jacob squared his shoulders, his expression serious. "I'm just being me." "I don't care what you think," he replied, his voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. The boys laughed, but it wasn't as mocking as before. Jacob's words had clearly caught them off guard. "Whatever, man," Tyler said, attempting to brush it off. David felt a swell of pride at Jacob's response. It wasn't easy to confront those who had hurt him, and he knew that this moment would be pivotal in Jacob's journey toward self-acceptance. After the awkward moment, Jacob rejoined Sarah and the others, who had witnessed the exchange. "You were really brave, Jacob," Sarah said, her eyes shining with admiration. "I don't care what they say. You're awesome." David watched as Jacob beamed at Sarah's compliment. The encouragement from his friends seemed to bolster his confidence, allowing him to shake off the encounter and focus on the fun. As the party continued, Jacob and his friends engaged in a friendly game of pin the tail on the donkey. Amid the laughter and cheers, David felt a wave of relief wash over him. Later, when the kids gathered around to eat cake, David took a moment to check in with Jacob. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently, leaning closer. "I'm okay, Dad," Jacob replied, his mouth full of frosting. "I think I'm finally starting to fit in." That night, as they returned home, David felt a sense of accomplishment. Jacob had faced his fears and stood up for himself. He had navigated a challenging social situation with resilience and grace. "Dad, can we do that talk again? I want to help other kids feel brave like I do now," Jacob said as they settled on the couch, preparing for a bedtime story. David smiled, feeling his heart swell with pride. "Absolutely, buddy. You have so much courage, and your story can help others. You're becoming a real superhero, you know that?" Jacob's face lit up, the mention of his superhero alter ego bringing a twinkle to his eye. "Yeah. Captain Courage. That's me." As David tucked him in, he marveled at the journey they had undertaken together. Jacob was blossoming into a strong, confident young man, and David felt grateful to be a part of it. Together, they were learning that the path to acceptance, friendship, and love wasn't always easy, but it was always worth fighting for. As autumn settled in, the days grew shorter, and the chill in the air served as a reminder of change. Jacob continued to thrive at school, his confidence blossoming like the colorful leaves outside. David often caught glimpses of his son engaged in spirited conversations, laughing with friends, and even taking the lead during group activities. It was a transformation that filled David's heart with pride, knowing that the discussions they'd had were beginning to bear fruit. One crisp Saturday morning, David and Jacob sat at the kitchen table, enjoying pancakes adorned with maple syrup and fresh fruit. The sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over their cozy home. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Jacob's voice broke through the comfortable silence. "Of course, buddy. What's on your mind?" David replied, pouring more syrup onto Jacob's stack of pancakes. "I want to have a talk at school again," Jacob said, his eyes sparkling with determination. "But this time, I want to do it in front of the whole school, not just my class. I want everyone to hear what I have to say." David paused, his fork suspended in midair. The idea took him by surprise, but he quickly masked his concern with encouragement. "That sounds like a big step. What do you want to talk about?" "I want to talk about being different and how it's okay to be who you are. I want everyone to know that bullying isn't cool and that we can all be friends," Jacob explained, his voice unwavering. "That's a powerful message, Jacob. I think you'll inspire a lot of people. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility?" David asked, leaning forward to meet his son's gaze. "I am. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I want to help others feel brave like I do now," Jacob said earnestly. David couldn't help but smile at his son's passion. "Then let's make it happen. I'll help you prepare, and we can work on your speech together." The two spent the next week crafting Jacob's speech. They worked on the message, practiced delivery, and even role-played various scenarios Jacob might encounter. David encouraged Jacob to express his feelings, emphasizing the importance of vulnerability and authenticity. He saw the fire in Jacob's spirit, and it ignited a sense of hope in him. On the day of the assembly, the auditorium buzzed with energy. Students shuffled in, their voices echoing off the walls. Jacob stood backstage, his heart racing. David placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've got this, Jacob. Remember, it's your voice that matters. Speak from the heart." Taking a deep breath, Jacob stepped onto the stage, his legs trembling but his resolve firm. As he faced the sea of familiar and unfamiliar faces, he felt a surge of anxiety wash over him. But as he looked out into the crowd, he spotted Sarah and a few other friends giving him encouraging smiles, and he found his footing. "Hi, everyone," Jacob began, his voice wavering slightly but growing stronger with each word. "My name is Jacob, and today I want to talk about being different and how important it is to accept each other for who we are." The audience quieted, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Jacob's heart raced as he continued, sharing his experiences with bullying and the impact it had on him. He spoke about fear, isolation, and ultimately the importance of friendship and understanding. "I know what it feels like to be left out, but we can change that. We can be kind to each other and celebrate our differences instead of making fun of them," he urged, his voice growing more confident. As he spoke, David watched with admiration, filled with pride at his son's courage. Jacob was not just talking about his struggles, he was inviting everyone to join him in creating a more inclusive and compassionate environment. Jacob concluded his speech with a powerful message: "We're all unique, and that's what makes us special. Let's promise to lift each other up and be kind. Together, we can create a school where everyone feels safe and accepted." The auditorium erupted into applause as Jacob stepped back from the microphone, a mixture of relief and exhilaration washing over him. He beamed, his heart soaring as he realized that his words had resonated with his peers. David rushed to embrace him as he left the stage. "You were incredible. I'm so proud of you, Jacob," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I did it, Dad. I really did it," Jacob exclaimed, his face flushed with excitement. In the days that followed, Jacob's speech became a catalyst for change within the school. The administration recognized the need for ongoing discussions about bullying and inclusion, and they implemented workshops and activities aimed at promoting kindness and empathy among students. Jacob's courage inspired others to share their stories, fostering an environment where students felt empowered to speak up against bullying. As the holiday season approached, Jacob and his friends decided to organize a charity drive to support a local shelter for families in need. They collected food, clothing, and toys, and Jacob's enthusiasm was infectious. He rallied his classmates and even involved parents in the effort, uniting the school around a common cause. On the day of the charity drive, David watched as Jacob and his friends joyfully loaded boxes into a van, their laughter ringing through the air. He was amazed at how far Jacob had come. His transformation was a testament to his resilience and strength. That evening, as they settled in for their nightly routine, David turned to Jacob. "You've done an amazing job, son. You've not only made a difference in your life but in the lives of others too." Jacob smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. "I just want everyone to feel happy and accepted, Dad. I want to keep helping people." David wrapped his arm around Jacob, feeling grateful for the bond they shared. "And you will. I believe in you, and I'm here for you every step of the way." As they prepared for bed, David couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey they had undertaken together. Jacob's courage and determination had not only transformed his own life but had also touched the hearts of those around him. In that moment, David realized that their story was just beginning. With each step they took together, they were forging a path toward a brighter future, one filled with love, acceptance, and the unwavering belief that kindness could change the world. And as Jacob drifted off to sleep, David felt a sense of hope, knowing that his son would continue to be a beacon of light for others. Months passed since Jacob's inspiring speech had echoed through the school auditorium, and the impact of his words rippled far beyond the walls of his school. The charity drive they organized had not only provided tangible help to families in need, but it also ignited a movement of kindness and acceptance in the community. Parents, teachers, and students alike rallied together to create programs that encouraged understanding and respect, laying a foundation for a new culture within the school. One sunny afternoon in late spring, David stood on the sidelines of the schoolyard, watching as Jacob played soccer with his friends. Laughter filled the air, a beautiful symphony of youthful joy and camaraderie. The sight warmed David's heart, a stark contrast to the dark days when Jacob had felt isolated and bullied. Jacob was no longer just surviving, he was thriving, surrounded by a supportive group of friends who celebrated each other's differences. As the game ended and the kids collapsed onto the grass, breathless and smiling, Jacob approached David with a big grin. "Did you see that goal I scored, Dad?" he exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. "I did. That was amazing, Jacob." "You really played like a pro," David replied, his chest swelling with pride. "I'm so proud of how far you've come." Jacob shrugged, a modest smile on his face. "Thanks, Dad. But it's not just me. Everyone is getting along now, and we're all supporting each other. It feels really good. That's the spirit. You've made a difference, not just for yourself but for everyone," David said, pulling Jacob into a warm hug. The two of them made their way home, chatting about the game and the upcoming summer vacation. Jacob's excitement was palpable as he talked about plans for a community picnic where everyone could come together to celebrate their diversity. As they entered their home, Jacob's phone buzzed with notifications. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted to one of surprise. "Dad! We got an invitation to the school board meeting. They want to hear from me about the anti-bullying programs we started." David felt a wave of pride wash over him. "That's incredible, Jacob. What do you think you'll say?" "I want to talk about how much it's helped us and how important it is to keep pushing for change. I want to encourage other schools to do the same," Jacob said earnestly. David nodded, his heart swelling with admiration for his son's courage. "You'll do great. Just speak from the heart like you always do." As the day of the school board meeting approached, David and Jacob worked together on Jacob's presentation. They rehearsed in the evenings, with David encouraging Jacob to share not just facts, but his personal journey and the emotions that had driven him to advocate for change. On the day of the meeting, Jacob walked into the room filled with school board members, teachers, and parents, his heart racing. As he took his place at the podium, he scanned the room, feeling both nervous and excited. David sat in the front row, giving him an encouraging thumbs up. "Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob," he began, his voice steadying as he spoke. I'm here to talk about why we need to keep fighting against bullying in our schools. Jacob shared his experiences, the struggles he had faced, and how speaking out had empowered him and his peers. He articulated the positive changes that had taken place since they implemented the anti-bullying programs. With each word, he inspired others to take action, urging them to create a safe environment where every student felt valued. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. David's eyes glistened with pride as he saw the impact of Jacob's words sink in. The board members were visibly moved, nodding in agreement and scribbling notes as they recognized the need to continue supporting these initiatives. As the meeting adjourned, several board members approached Jacob, expressing their admiration for his courage and articulating their commitment to expanding the anti-bullying programs across the district. Jacob beamed with pride, knowing that his voice had contributed to a larger change. Weeks turned into months, and the summer arrived with the promise of warmth and adventure. Jacob's community picnic was a resounding success, drawing families from all backgrounds. They enjoyed games, food, and stories, celebrating the very diversity that Jacob had championed. As the sun set, casting a golden hue over the park, David stood with Jacob, watching the joyful scene unfold. "You've built something beautiful here, Jacob. You've inspired people to come together and embrace each other's differences." "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad," Jacob replied, his eyes bright with happiness. "You taught me that it's okay to stand up for what's right and that I have a voice." David smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. "And you've shown so many others that their voices matter too. You're creating a legacy, son, a legacy of kindness, acceptance, and change." As the laughter and chatter continued around them, David knew that this was just the beginning for Jacob. He was not only a son but also a leader, a beacon of hope for many who felt silenced. Together, they had journeyed through challenges, discovering strength, resilience, and the power of community. In the years to come, Jacob would continue to advocate for change, working alongside peers and mentors, forever dedicated to fostering an environment where every individual was celebrated for who they were. And as he embarked on new adventures, David would always be by his side, supporting him every step of the way. In a world that often felt divided, Jacob's story reminded them all that love and understanding could build bridges, transforming hearts and minds, one person at a time. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood united, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, committed to making the world a brighter, more inclusive place for everyone.